Imagine a weapon so ruthless, so terrifying, that it can kill every living thing inside a concrete bunker or deep underground cave, without even cracking the walls. It sounds like science fiction, a superweapon from a dystopian movie. But it's not. It's real. And it's called a thermobaric weapon. Nicknamed vacuum bombs, these monsters of modern warfare are not just deadly, they're almost mythic in their power. They don't just kill. They suffocate, vaporize, and obliterate. They can reach around corners. They snake through tunnels. They leave no safe place behind. In fact, some thermobaric bombs are so powerful they rival, and in one case, even claim to surpass, America's strongest tactical nuclear weapons. But how do they work? To understand that, you need to rethink everything you know about explosives. The typical bomb, your average warhead or missile, relies on chemicals packed inside the casing. When it detonates, the explosion is fueled by the oxygen that's already mixed into those chemicals. But thermobaric weapons flip the script. They don't bring their oxygen with them. They steal it from the air around them. A true thermobaric bomb works in two stages. First, it bursts open and releases a fine mist of highly flammable fuel into the air. Not gasoline or jet fuel, but something far more energetic. Then, the second charge ignites the cloud. The oxygen in the surrounding atmosphere is sucked in to feed the explosion, creating a blast wave so fierce it crushes lungs, shreds organs, and pulls the very air from your body. That's why they're called vacuum bombs. The result? A shockwave that bypasses cover, rolls through tunnels, races down hallways, and ignores anything short of a mountain. Trenches? Useless. Concrete bunkers? Penetrated. Anyone hiding nearby doesn't just die, they're torn apart by sheer pressure. It's not just destruction. It's devastation, designed for maximum psychological terror. And if you think that's horrifying, consider this. Russia claims to have built a thermobaric bomb so powerful, it makes America's largest non-nuclear weapon look like a firecracker. But we'll get to that monster later. For now, what's most disturbing is that this isn't just theoretical. Thermobaric weapons are real. They've been built. They've been tested. And yes, they've been used in some of the bloodiest wars of the past 2 decades. So how many countries actually have them? Who's willing to use them? And what happens when thermobaric fire meets civilians? You're about to find out. To grasp just how deadly thermobaric weapons are, it helps to understand why they exist in the first place. A normal bomb is constrained by its size, its weight, its chemical composition. It can only deliver so much energy, and only in a very specific direction. It has to carry everything it needs, fuel, oxidizer, casing, all packed into a warhead. That limits its power. But thermobaric bombs cheat the system. Instead of carrying all their fuel, they unleash it mid-air, spreading a cloud of finely powdered explosives across a wide area. And instead of carrying their oxygen, they steal it from the environment, giving them a brutal, oxygen-hungry punch that's impossible to hide from. This turns every surrounding molecule into fuel. The bigger the air volume, the bigger the blast. And unlike a traditional explosion, which ends in an instant, the pressure wave from a thermobaric bomb lingers. It flows. It creeps through confined spaces like a phantom, ignoring barriers and annihilating anything it touches. You might hear them called vacuum bombs, fuel-air explosives, or thermobaric warheads. But the principle is always the same. Spread fuel, ignite it, and consume everything, including the air in your lungs. And because of their horrifying efficiency, these weapons have sparked massive controversy. They don't discriminate. A thermobaric blast doesn't care if you're a soldier or a child. Once triggered, it's impossible to control. That's why human rights organizations have called for their ban. But despite that, more and more countries are quietly developing and stockpiling them. Because sometimes, militaries don't want a scalpel. They want a hammer. And when America needs a hammer, it has options. While the US has spent decades pursuing precision-guided munitions, smart bombs, drone strikes, and surgical air raids, it hasn't turned its back on brute force solutions. That's where thermobaric weapons come in. In select situations when pinpoint accuracy isn't enough, the Pentagon pulls out the big guns, literally. The US arsenal includes thermobaric warheads built for everything from Hellfire missiles to shoulder-launched systems. But one of the most infamous thermobaric weapons ever developed was designed for a very specific mission: flushing terrorists out of mountain caves in the post-9/11 world. It's called the Blue 118/B, a bomb born not from theory, but from necessity. Based on Vietnam-era napalm technology, The Blue 118 was America's answer to hardened Al-Qaeda bunkers buried deep in the mountains of Afghanistan. Researchers designed it with a delayed fuse so it could be skipped, yes, skipped like a stone, into cave mouths before detonating far inside. Its first real-world test came in 2002. F-15s dropped the bomb on a suspected Al-Qaeda complex hidden within a network of caves. The results were staggering. The blast pressure traveled through the tunnels, incinerating everyone inside without damaging the mountain itself. For U.S. forces, it was proof of concept, a weapon that could reach the unreachable. But even with this power, America uses thermobaric weapons sparingly. They are rare, tightly controlled, and almost never deployed without high-level approval. That's because every time one is used, the risk of civilian casualties and global backlash skyrockets. That restraint, however, is not shared by every nation. In fact, one country has embraced thermobaric weapons not as a last resort, but as a battlefield staple, refining and deploying them with chilling enthusiasm: Russia. And they've taken thermobaric warfare to an entirely new level. If the United States treats thermobaric weapons like a scalpel, used only in the rarest, most desperate situations, Russia wields them like a flamethrower. Ever since its brutal war in Afghanistan during the 1980s, the Russian military has been obsessed with maximizing firepower and minimizing risk to its soldiers. And nothing embodies that philosophy more than their favorite engine of thermobaric destruction, the TOS-1. At first glance, the TOS-1 looks like a tank. But it's not. It's a mobile furnace. Built on a T-72 tank chassis, the TOS-1 swaps out the cannon for something far deadlier, a rack of 24 massive thermobaric rockets. When fired, those rockets saturate an entire area with fuel mist, then ignite it in a chain of earth-shaking explosions. The effect is catastrophic. Entire hillsides are flattened. Structures are vaporized. People inside bunkers are crushed or suffocated, and those outside are cooked alive in the shockwave. The TOS-1's nickname? Son-Sepiok, the blazing sun. And the name fits. Watching one in action is like seeing the atmosphere catch fire. Russia has deployed around 50 of these terrifying machines and exported variants to allies including Iraq, Syria, Algeria, and Azerbaijan. But for Russian troops on the ground, the TOS-1 is only part of the thermobaric equation. For something more personal and equally ruthless, they rely on the Arpe Shmel, or Bumblebee. The Bumblebee is a disposable, man-portable rocket launcher. Think of it as a flamethrower with the soul of a hand cannon. Light enough to carry, strong enough to level a room, it's capable of delivering an explosion equivalent to a 155mm artillery shell. And unlike artillery, it doesn't arc in from miles away. It comes from the next hallway over. Originally developed alongside the TOS-1, the Shmel quickly became standard issue for Russian infantry. It's been spotted in nearly every major conflict Russia has fought in: Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, and most infamously, Ukraine. In the trenches of eastern Ukraine, Shmels are a constant threat. They're used not just against bunkers, but against houses, vehicles, even apartment buildings. Their indiscriminate nature has turned them into a symbol of Russia's scorched earth tactics. And then there's the sky. Russia has developed a wide range of air-dropped thermobaric bombs, most notably the ODB-500, a staple of the Russian Air Force since the 1990s. Dropped from fast-moving jets, the ODB creates a wide-area fuel cloud before igniting it with a devastating blast. It's been used extensively in Chechnya, in Syria, and now in Ukraine, where entire civilian neighborhoods have been hit. Shelters? Useless. The ODAB's blast wave punches through ventilation systems and cracks in concrete. Survivors have described it as a giant sucking sound, followed by crushing pressure and searing heat. Then silence. But Ukraine hasn't been passive. In a twist of modern warfare, Ukrainian forces have begun turning the tables, dropping small thermobaric grenades, like the RGT-27S, from drones onto Russian vehicles. These palm-sized bombs may be tiny compared to the ODAB or the TOS-1, but in the confined space of a tank, their effect is lethal. A single hit can turn an armored vehicle into a steel coffin. How did this happen? How did a weapon once the size of a missile evolve into something you can carry in a backpack or drop from a drone? To answer that, we need to rewind the clock, back to when this nightmare began. Back to where thermobaric warfare was born. Thermobaric weapons feel like a product of modern war, sleek, terrifying, high-tech. But their origins are far murkier, and their history reads like a spy novel filled with rumors, secrecy, and shadowy experiments. Some claim the idea was born in the darkest days of World War II, when German scientists were allegedly experimenting with exotic explosives designed to collapse bunkers and suffocate enemies. There are whispers of prototype devices, strange fuel mixtures, and eerie photographs of unfamiliar bomb casings. But that's all they are, whispers. There's no hard proof the Nazis ever built a working thermobaric bomb. The United States, however, did. In the final years of the Vietnam War, American forces faced an impossible problem: the Viet Song tunnel networks. These underground strongholds ran for miles, often deep beneath thick jungle, reinforced and invisible from the air. Not even the devastating B-52 carpet bombings could reach them. So the U.S. Air Force turned to something new, something terrifying. It was called the CBU-55. The CBU-55 was America's first confirmed thermobaric weapon, and it was designed to do one thing: send a deadly wave of fire and pressure surging into those tunnels, cooking the air and everything inside. The first combat trials took place in 1971 and 1972. The results were promising, shockingly so. But then, just as the weapon was proving itself, the U.S. began withdrawing from Vietnam. In 1973, full-scale production was halted, and the CBU-55 quietly disappeared from public view. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, the Soviets were watching. About 7 years after the Americans, the USSR began developing its own thermobaric technology. Unlike the US, which saw thermobaric weapons as a tactical tool, the Soviets saw them as a solution, a brute force answer to a structural military weakness. While the US relied on elite, highly trained troops with precision firepower, the Soviet Union was grappling with a different reality: a massive army, but low morale and limited training. Their answer? Make the weapons do the hard work. Use overwhelming, area-destroying firepower to crush resistance, and let conscripts clean up the rest. And it worked. In 1987, Soviet forces rolled into Afghanistan with the terrifying new TOS-1 launcher and the ARPOA Shmal in tow. In the jagged mountains and cave-riddled hills, these weapons were brutally effective. They turned safe havens into tombs, flattening strongholds and vaporizing resistance with a single pull of the trigger. From there, the floodgates opened. As the USSR collapsed and Russia emerged from the wreckage, its generals doubled down. Thermobaric weapons became a pillar of Russian doctrine, not just for combat superiority, but for psychological warfare. Nothing breaks the will of a fighter quite like a weapon that makes hiding useless. But it wasn't just about firepower anymore. Russia began experimenting with smaller, more portable versions, turning once massive bombs into shoulder-fired weapons. These could be used in urban combat, sieges, or even against crowds. It was shock and awe scaled down to the level of a foot soldier. And that shift, from missile to man-portable, changed everything. Thermobaric warfare had now become personal. The weapon wasn't just something that came from the sky. It could now come from the soldier in the next room, the drone hovering overhead, or the vehicle parked just around the corner. And the next chapter in this evolution would be even more terrifying. Because as Russia pushed its thermobaric arsenal to new extremes, it also began bragging about something even deadlier: a bomb so big, so powerful, it could rival the devastation of a small nuclear blast. A weapon the Kremlin proudly called the father of all bombs. It was 2007 when Russia stunned the world with a single, ominous announcement. They claimed to have created the most powerful non-nuclear bomb ever built. A weapon so devastating, it could flatten city blocks in a single strike. A weapon 4 times stronger than America's mother of all bombs. They called it the father of all bombs, and they said it was thermobaric. According to Russian officials, the FOAB delivered a blast yield of 44 tons of TNT. That's nearly equivalent to a small tactical nuclear warhead, but without the radioactive fallout. They claimed it used advanced nanotechnology to produce a thermal and pressure wave so intense, it could destroy targets that even nuclear weapons would struggle to vaporize. The message was clear: the Russians had created a bomb that could do the work of a nuke, but without the political cost of going nuclear. State-run TV released footage. We saw a massive device being pushed from the back of a Tupolev Tu-160 heavy bomber. We saw the sky light up with a searing fireball. We heard the numbers: twice the heat, 4 times the power, half the size. But here's the problem: nobody outside of Russia has ever verified it. There was no independent confirmation, no additional test footage, no evidence of deployment. Just one single test, edited and released by the Russian military itself, and then silence. Experts began to ask questions. Why was there only one drop? Why was the delivery plane, a Tu-160, modified in ways that suggested it wasn't a live bomb? Why were there no visible shockwaves or thermal ripples consistent with the claimed blast size? And most of all, if this weapon truly existed, why hasn't Russia used it in Ukraine? After all, if you had a bomb that could incinerate enemy positions without risking your troops, why wouldn't you use it, especially when your army is struggling? The answer may be simple: the father of all bombs might be a myth. A psychological weapon, not a battlefield one. Some analysts believe the FOAB was never truly operational. It may have been a one-off prototype, too heavy, too unstable, or too risky to deploy. Others believe it was pure propaganda, designed to bluff the West and distract from Russia's real weaknesses in precision and logistics. And in the brutal reality of war, propaganda can be just as powerful as firepower. Meanwhile, on the ground in Ukraine, Russia's real thermobaric weapons, the TOS-1s, the Shmels, the ODABs, are still in use. Still deadly. Still feared. But they're not unstoppable. Ukrainian forces have adapted, innovated, and even turned thermobaric technology against the invaders, proving that while these weapons are terrifying, they're not magic. They can be countered, defended against, even repurposed. And that's the final truth of thermobaric warfare. It's not just about the explosion. It's about the fear of air that burns, of pressure that crushes, of hiding places that aren't safe anymore. These weapons are a glimpse into a future of war where the environment itself becomes the weapon, where oxygen becomes your enemy. And while governments argue, militaries posture, and footage circulates online, the terrifying reality is that these bombs exist. They're real. And one wrong decision could bring them back into the headlines, not as theories or test footage, but as firestorms on the evening news.